Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deserts and Garden podcast. I'm Nathan, and this is my wife Mia.
If you're new here, hey. On this podcast, we share daily highs and lows, but this is not just a highlight reel. Here, we share the realities of navigating marriage, faith, and our life together with God's guidance every step of the way. So today, we're going to be talking about something that's really been on our hearts lately, and that is you never know who's listening or who's watching us.
Yeah, and we don't mean like little eyes. We just mean in general who's watching, whether it's at work, or even at home, or just even a passing conversation. Our words, our actions can have huge impacts on people, and even if we don't realize it in the moments,
Yeah.
we never know who's really watching us.
Yeah, I love that you made that distinction because this could be for, the mom and dad, but this could also just be for, like, the single girl who's,
Right.
like, working in an office or the guy who's working at a firehouse. Like, this kind of applies to everything, but you can, apply it to different situations. So today, we're going to break it down into 3 key parts, as we do. First, we'll talk about how God can use even the smallest conversations to bring people to Him. And then we'll talk about why the way that we treat each other, especially in our marriage, is a witness to those around us. And then we'll wrap it up with talking about how we can be intentional about reflecting Christ in our daily lives, even in more tough environments.
Yeah, so let's jump into it.
Yeah, so let's start with this wild story, babe, that you told me about the guy who was under the desk.
Oh, right.
Something.
Yeah. So I heard this story a while back. I don't remember if it was a podcast or maybe we heard it at church. But long story, I'll just get right into it. Basically there was this guy who was an atheist, and he had his friend who would constantly come into his place of business and just basically we'll call it pester him. When I say pester, we come in and he'd be like, "Hey, bro, I really want you to come to church. You've been really on my mind lately. I've been really trying to, and he's been jumping through all the hoops, I'll take you and your wife out for lunch afterwards, and, he's throwing out all the stops. And on the specific day in question, it's right before, I think it was, Easter, the guy was like, "Hey, listen, I want you to come. I've been asking you for a while, he's really laying it down on how much God and Jesus loves him." And, the guy was pretty much adamant, "Hey, thank you so much for thinking of me. I'm not interested." Guy goes on his way. He's a little defeated. Goes home. Cool. Whatever. Fast forward a year. It's the following Easter. He's in the lobby of his church. This guy comes running up to him, and he's like, "Hey, I want to thank you so much for just being who you are, and just how powerful and impactful your testimony was." And our guy here was like, "I have no idea who this man is." And he's like, "Listen, you don't know me. I just want to say the day that you came and you were talking to I guess it was your friend. You didn't see me. I was actually working underneath the desk behind where you guys were talking. And I heard everything you said to him. And, it's been something that I had been battling with for a while about going back to church and, really involving it. So as soon as I got done working there, I got paid. I left. I picked up my cell phone. I called my wife and said, 'Babe, we're going to church Sunday.'" And, it radically reformed my life, saved my marriage, and he just gushed about how much, God did for him in just the season. So that's what we're saying. You never really know who's watching.
Yeah, I've heard that story a couple times now, and I just got chills actually listening to you say that again. But, I mean, yeah, it's just that idea that, you never know who's listening. And, I mean, this guy, he had no idea that he was planting a seed. And, I mean, that's the thing. Sometimes we don't always get to see the impact of our words, but that
Right.
doesn't mean that they don't matter.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's not just about our words. It's our actions. It's, for us, it's our marriage.
Yeah.
We're in the middle of church and we might not notice, but us just being kind to each other,
Yeah.
us just maybe holding hands,
Yeah.
you don't know what kind of message that's sending to somebody.
That's true. Yeah, but bringing it back to our words, the Bible does say that the power of death and life is in the tongue. So, what we say, that can change someone's life for better or for worse. And that's why we have to be so intentional when we are sharing our faith, or like you're saying, just living that out. We might not ever notice, but people are paying attention. I mean, especially for us, being more new to the faith, I feel like people then are like, "Oh, Mia does this, or
Yeah.
Nate does it." People watch how we behave.
People watch, people compare, and even though we're not supposed to, people absolutely do.
100%.
But hey, let's talk about something that hits a little closer to home, literally.
All right, so Right now, we are living with Nathan's parents, and while this has been a really good season for us, at least in our marriage, it has also been challenging at times.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime you bring, two married couples together who, marriages reflect God in different ways, it can be it can be difficult.
Yeah.
And basically when I say different ways, like, we're not always on the same page with each other. Me and we have disagreements, and, we also have bad days, and, we have these moments of frustration where
Yeah.
we're, lashing out, and we're not perfect, right? We fight.
Yeah.
Everybody fights.
Yeah.
My point is, like, having another couple who's there, and you're also hearing their fights and the way they, they're doing it. Like, it also has a huge impact on how, we speak to each other.
No, 100%. I mean, when you're living, especially in someone else's home, you really start thinking about how you handle those moments, because, I mean, there's nothing worse than a Christian couple who treats each other, in ungodly ways behind closed doors. And I was actually, I think it was like a reel or something, and it started with, I believe it was Cece Williams, might have been doing a speech, and she said, when you do something like stub your toe, you know how a lot of people will automatically want to cuss.
Oh, absolutely.
And she said, Christians shouldn't have that. When, something happens, what comes out should be what's in your heart.
Yeah,
and if that's what's in your heart, it's like curses shouldn't be coming out of your mouth because they shouldn't be in your heart.
Yeah.
And I thought that was so deep.
Can you imagine that? Just stubbing your toe and like, praise Jesus!
No, seriously, that was the next, it was a stitch. So the next part of it, the girl stubs her toes and she's like, for the glory of God.
Yeah.
And I was like, I was cracking. Like, I literally lost it. That was hilarious. But, sorry, bringing it back. Yeah, it's just like, if we have God in our hearts, even when we disagree,
right,
what comes out of our mouth should still be reflecting what's inside of our hearts.
Right, and that's challenging too, because, if what's coming out of your mouth isn't reflective of God, then you have to ask yourself, like, what is really on your heart?
Yeah.
Like, this has been really big thing for us to work on.
Yeah.
Kind of going a little into more my testimony here. Like, my parents are yellers.
Yeah, my mom was a yeller.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I grew up around, so that's what I perceived as normal.
Yeah. I mean, breaking generational curses is hard. We actually did another episode talking about a little bit more in depth about, you are your parents unless you choose to change. That was episode 9. So definitely go back and listen to that one if this is something you guys are struggling with. But with that being said, it is our responsibility when we notice something to do something about it.
Absolutely. And when we say, like, do something about it, it's 100% worth it. Because, we talk about, taking it back to the beginning of this episode, like, talking about, like, little eyes.
Yeah.
We want to model this for our kids. We don't want to, repeat these cycles of dysfunction, because that's how generational curses spread.
Yeah. I mean, we don't have kids yet, but we're already looking ahead and preparing for the future, which we've also talked about in, a previous episode, preparing for that next season. And, we sat down and we were like, hey, what do we want our legacy to be? Like, how do we want people to remember us? How do we want our children to see us? And, we decided, like, we want to be an example of love, of grace, of an actual biblical marriage, not just some performance of Christianity. We want to be walking that out on a day-to-day basis, even in the hard times, like when we're fighting.
Absolutely, because the good book says in Ephesians, let no corrupting talk come out of your mouth, but only so much as, what is good for building up others as it fits the occasion.
That's good.
That it may give grace to those who hear it.
Yeah, those who hear it. Like, that's people around us. Even when we are fighting, those who hear it. And this isn't to say, oh, you shouldn't fight it in front of your kids. You shouldn't have disagreements, in front of your family or things like that. I mean, I do also agree, maybe in another topic we'll talk about, not publicly disagreeing with your spouse, because that could be disrespectful. But, going back to that verse, letting no corrupt words come out of your mouth, like, that's not just to strangers, because I often feel like we're kinder to people we don't know than we are to our family or to our spouse, because, I mean, we talked about this in another podcast. When you're comfortable,
you take them for granted.
You get disrespectful. You get to be dishonoring.
Yeah, and like I said, you just get comfortable and you take them for granted.
Yeah.
But hey, let's talk about something that a lot of people struggle with now. That, is being a Christian in today's world and honestly a secular environment.
Like a firehouse?
Yeah, exactly. Yep. So, in case you didn't know, I am a firefighter and I work in a firehouse.
Yeah.
And let's just say it's not exactly a Bible study group.
So no Wednesday night worship sessions at the station?
Yeah, not quite. To picture like, firehouses as a lot of ex-military, a lot of, just a lot of, rough guys.
Yeah.
Construction workers and all, like, just boil all that into one place and you found yourself in the middle of a firehouse. There's a lot of cussing, crude jokes. Definitely not a lot of guys talking about Jesus.
Okay, so then tell us how you handle that as a Christian.
Yeah, as a Christian in those environments, I just try to be consistent. Like, I try not to cuss. I don't participate in any inappropriate conversations. I don't jump in on the crude jokes. I don't share in, the disgusting text messages. And, when there's an opportunity, I pray for people.
Yeah.
And the opportunity doesn't come around a lot. But what I do let people do is catch me praying.
That's good. Yeah, no, I mean, that alone would make an impact, of course. I do want to say, though, on that topic, is we should probably do another episode on cussing, because that, I feel like, has been a struggle.
Absolutely.
And we talk about that a lot. So we'll do another podcast on cussing. If that's something you guys are interested in, definitely let us know.
Yeah, but no, I mean, taking it back, like, people notice.
Yeah.
And they might not say anything all the time, but they do see that, I'm acting or I'm moving differently. Mm-hmm. And it causes them to, ask questions or just even think about it. Like, hey, what's going on? Like, why is he different? And where that sounds like, that can go either way, where, people might question, like, I don't want to be different. Like, no, you do want to be different. You want to be a light.
Yeah, I mean, we all have influence, and we can all either use that to glorify God, like we were created to, or we could use it to satisfy our flesh.
Right. Matthew 5:16 says, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify the Father in heaven.
Glorify the Father in heaven. That means in every environment, at home, at work, even on social media, what you're liking, that's either glorifying God or satisfying your flesh.
Yeah, and for the guys and girls who don't know, yes, people can see your likes.
Yes,
they can see what your history. So, trust me, people see what you're doing.
Yeah.
That being said, we don't have to preach at people 24/7. Mm-hmm. We don't want to be the people who are constantly, like, being that person, chasing somebody around with the Bible, hitting them over the head.
Yeah.
Like, we need to find a way to live in a way that points to Jesus.
That's good.
Without beating somebody up.
Right. So, here's our challenge for this week. It's to just be aware of your influence, whether that's in your home, at work, just passing conversations like the guy at the bank. Like, just remember, someone is always listening. Someone is always watching. We have an influence, and we should be using that to glorify God.
Absolutely. And, hey, don't underestimate the power of small, faithful moments. Mm-hmm. Just a small conversation, a single act of love, it can really change a life. And even if you don't see it right away, you don't know what kind of seeds you're planting.
That's good. Yeah. So if this episode encouraged you guys, definitely let us know. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, be sure to leave us a review. It really helps us to reach more people with the gospel.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're watching on YouTube, smash that like button and drop a comment. And, don't forget to subscribe.
Great. Thank you guys so much for listening to the Deserts and Gardens podcast. Until next time, walk in love.
Live with purpose.
And trust God in every desert and garden. See you guys.